Hello, welcome, welcome. Thank you so much for joining us for this discussion on deepfake pornography and the issue of deepfake pornography. My name is Charlotte Ma. I'm the social media editor at Bellingcat. I'm joined here with my colleague, Kalina Koltai, at the end, 404 Media's Sam Cole, and The Guardian's Michael Safi. So, deepfake pornography is a troubling subject at the moment. It's something that a lot of people may be aware of and may not be aware of in this room. It is a prevalent thing going on online, and it's a risk that many people are not necessarily aware of. When we're talking about deepfake pornography, what we're talking about is people taking imagery of others without consent and making intimate and explicit content. It's so prolific at the moment. There's a website called Mr. Deepfakes, for example, that has been accessed by over 650,000 people every month. Luckily, just this morning, we found out that that particular website is currently down, so that's very good. But this risk still remains, and there's apps and available applications on phones and on websites that are very, very easy to access for very cheap. All you need is an image of a single person from Instagram, from TikTok, from anywhere, and in 5 minutes you can make extremely explicit imagery without their knowledge and without their consent. So, how did we get here? How did we get to this stage where people have no control over their own image? Sam, you have been studying for a long time how sex has basically changed the internet. Can you talk to us first about how this deepfake pornography has kind of arisen and how it's become this problem that we see today?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I'm going to try to make this the briefest history possible that I can. It's covering about 7 years of innovation in this space, if you want to call it that. So yeah, this will be a nutshell, but my colleagues will fill in a lot more detail after. Yeah, so in about late December 2017, I became the first journalist to discover deepfakes in the wild. The guy who was creating deepfakes was doing so on Reddit. He was just out in the open. And as far as I know, I'm the only journalist that has actually talked to him directly. And I say him because I asked for his pronouns, just because I knew someday someone would be like, well, how do you know it's a man? But he was in a Reddit community posting his video creations in a space that was dedicated to creating photoshopped images of celebrities' faces on porn performers' bodies. So they were just like still images made with Photoshop at the time. This was kind of like a fantasy fulfillment type hobby forum. But his technology took it a step farther because it wasn't just the still images, it was moving videos of celebrities' faces on porn performers' videos. So he was taking, say, Scarlett Johansson, for example, has been massively deepfaked for years and years and years. He was taking her face and putting it onto like his favorite porn clip. So yeah, this was definitely like a huge jump, obviously, in the technology. It wasn't just like crude Photoshops anymore. But pretty soon it became something that everyone, it was very quickly something that like thousands of people were also doing because he made the technology open source. And what he was doing was using generative adversarial networks to train a model on hundreds or thousands of photos of one celebrity's face taken from like videos or the internet, wherever, and then training that face to swap into whatever video he wanted. And it was all open source. He put it all on GitHub. So anyone could recreate what he was doing basically with their favorite celebrity or porn scene. So I sent him a message and I asked him how he was doing it, which he explained. And then I asked if he'd considered the ethical implications of this. Was he concerned at all about consent? in this, for example. And this is what he told me, and I'll just quote verbatim. "Every technology can be used with bad motivations, and it's impossible to stop that. I don't really think my algorithm is very different from the technology used to recreate Paul Walker in Fast and Furious 7. I don't think it's a bad thing for more average people to engage in machine learning research." And that, I think, is the last time I heard from him. He disappeared after that. And he deleted his account. I think he realized it got really popular and he didn't want to be associated anymore. So at the time, if you wanted to make a good deepfake, you would take a data set, like I said, of high quality images of one person, train a model, and then that would be kind of a computing intensive, hardware intensive, skill intensive process. Now, over the years, it's become so easy that at first it was you only need a handful of images, and then you only need one image and one video. And now you don't need any of that. You could just use a text prompt and describe who you want to see in a deepfake and what you want to see them do with generative AI. That's where we're at now. It's so easy that school children do it using apps on their phone. Which is a massive problem that I think we'll get into. And yeah, it's not really the same technological landscape in a lot of ways, but the scale now is massive. You could be targeted by someone who wants to harass you with deepfakes, and they can just churn out images by the dozens, the hundreds, however they want to do it. And a lot of the victims that I have talked to, victims of deepfakes, are just people who are going about their daily lives, and they happen to have some success online, or they're like a Twitch personality or an actor. Come in. And they're just randomly targeted, basically. It's like it's no fault of their own. They're not in sex work, but they also say that they have almost everyone I've talked to who's been targeted by this, they have no issue with sex work and with being a porn performer, but that's not the career they chose, and they're thrust into it. They're forced into having to deal with having, what seems like nude images of them all over the internet, and then having that associated with their name is even worse, because when you Google someone, what comes up is porn that they were never in. And they say it doesn't matter, that they know intellectually that the images are fake. It still feels very real. It feels like someone has spread non-consensual porn of you. It feels like someone has leaked nudes of you. And it's a process that relies on shame and stigma against sex work and against women in a lot of ways. And that's why it's an effective harassment tool, because in a lot of cultures, a lot of society, the worst thing that you could be seen as is a sex worker. So the whole process of harassment relies on the stigma that is put on sex work and on women being, people on the internet, basically. And that's kind of the dark secret of this, is that harassment of women online has been a problem for years, obviously, but it's just taken as part of being online as a woman and not something that anyone could do anything about, which is made so much worse by deepfakes because they're hard to track down, legislate against, bring any kind of repercussions against. It just creates a huge problem for the victims. So immediately after that first article in 2017, this was right after the 2016 elections, which was a chaotic time in the news anyway, as I'm sure we all have PTSD from. But the first thing that people thought of in 2017 when deepfake came about were, this is going to destabilize politics. This is going to spread disinformation. This is going to, someone's going to make a video of Trump launching a nuke and people are going to believe it. And none of that really happened in the US, at least, and I'll just speak for the US exclusively. But what did happen is it created a whole cottage industry of people creating and monetizing this harassment content and non-consensual imagery. Yeah, I mean, that's the very succinct bringing us to today. I can tell you there's still no good technological solution to deepfakes because the models keep getting better and better. There's no legislative solution that's perfect or works very well. But as I'm sure we'll discuss, I think the problem is at its core misogyny and this acceptance of the harassment that we see women enduring online. And with that, beautiful ending, I will pass it to you guys.
Yeah, thanks so much, Sam. Well, as you just explained, I mean, the creator's own words that you quoted there, I don't think it's to anyone's surprise in this room that this technology is probably doing more harm than good, despite what he may or may not have said. I think it's interesting as well that when we're talking about AI, often the conversations sway to AI and disinformation, AI and misinformation, even using AI in our newsrooms. But we don't often talk about the intersection between AI and sex as we are today, which is why I'm so glad that my colleague pitched this particular panel. Michael, this doesn't just affect grown women, for example, who have careers at risk. This also affects young girls, right, as well. So at The Guardian, on the Black Box series, which is currently up for a nomination, so congratulations on that, you've been looking into Cloth Off, which is a sexually explicit AI deepfake app, if everyone's not aware. And it's one that's been used by school children in Spain, right, to declothe their classmates. Can you tell us a little bit about what these established apps promise consumers, and how do you uncover the faceless network behind Cloth Off?
Yeah, I mean, this app, Cloth Off, was used both in Spain. In fact, why don't I just tell the story of the way we encountered Cloth Off, because I think it illustrates the way this app's being used in the real world. A little while ago, we came across a news story about this town in Spain, Almendralejo, that was being rocked by this incident where a bunch of kids at a high school got their hands on one of these nudifying apps. And, maybe predictably, they started using it on their classmates, so girls who were 12, 13, 14 years old. And this was a small town in southern Spain. It was not a place that was used to the amount of media attention that it got in the aftermath of this. And I think that exacerbated a lot of the difficulties people were having with trying to understand, what was this crime? Like, what was this technology? It was all so new. And we decided to go and visit the town and try and get a sense ourselves of what had gone on. And we met there with a woman called Miriam Al-Adib. She's a gynecologist. She calls herself a rebel gynecologist because she has this very big Instagram presence where she educates women on their health in a society that's still pretty conservative. And she told us how one day one of her daughters came home and said, "Mum, I've got to tell you something," and showed her, this was a 14-year-old girl, showed her a nude picture of herself to her mum. And her mum said, what she told us specifically was, if I didn't know my own daughter's body, I would have thought this was real. And it turned out that a bunch of boys had been making these pictures of lots of girls. Girls had been avoiding school, staying home. Obviously, this was a horrible first contact with this whole world of, boys and girls and men and women for these children, basically. And all of the photos were made with this app called Cloth Off. So we came home and tried to sort of dig into what was this app, Cloth Off. And they have a website, and they had a press section on the website and a media email. And so we thought, let's get in touch with them, because what are the chances they come back to us? And they did. They replied. We asked them to reply in voice notes because we were making a podcast, and they sent us answers to all our questions, but with a distorted voice. So the way almost like someone who's taken a ransom. And for us, that kind of really piqued our interest because we thought these guys don't want to be identified. Maybe naively, we thought, let's just try to figure out who they are. So the first thing we saw was there was an address on the Cloth Off website, and it was in London, actually very close to the Guardian office. So we went to this address, and we encountered the first of the many hurdles we would encounter, which was, it was registered to a virtual office. So, this is a building that houses, it's the kind of working address of tens of thousands of businesses. And it's designed, it can be used legally if you want to have your address in like a big business center. But in this case, it was being used to obscure the origins of who actually ran Clothoff. The next thing we did is we talked to one of our kind of tech investigations people, a guy called Luke Hoyland at The Guardian, who dug into this website. And he came back to us and said he found some interesting clues in the Clothoff code, which was that Clothoff was very similar to a bunch of other websites, including AI image websites and these similar kinds of websites that produce non-consensual intimate imagery. One of those websites was called AI Imagecraft. So Clothoff was linked in some way to AI Imagecraft, which we thought was interesting. He also found someone had put a bunch of Clothoff code on GitHub, a guy called Alexander German, a Russian coder. But again, we weren't sure. Had he just taken this from somebody else? Did this indicate that Alexander German was someone who worked on Clothoff? We weren't very sure. But I want to give you a sense of just how well hidden these sites are, the identities of these sites, and kind of how they work, how they make money. We decided to buy something off of Clothoff. So we used one of our kind of company cards to buy credits. These credits are used to, buy the ability to create these images. And the invoice name that came up was Texture Oasis, which we'd never heard of. It turns out Texture Oasis is a website that sells architectural renderings. I guess it's very common in the architectural industry. And Texture Oasis had a staff page, and we contacted a couple of members of Texture Oasis's staff. They told us they'd never heard of Texture Oasis, that their identities were being stolen and used to create this fake business whose purpose it seemed to be to obscure payments to Clothoff. So we got a sense here that we were dealing with a pretty sophisticated network, and probably a network that was not only making these kinds of images, right? This was infrastructure that was probably being used for all kinds of online crimes. The next thing we did was kept trying to talk to Clothoff. What's striking to me, Sam, is you mentioned the way that this Mr. Deepfake guy, whatever his name was, justified what he was doing. And the Clothoff guys in these distorted messages, they justified what they were doing in similar ways. Someone said it would be strange if you blamed email for these Nigerian prince scams that go around. That we're just providing the infrastructure, and how people use it is kind of up to them. Which, if you consider that at this point, Clothoff was being used not just in this Spanish school, but in a school in New Jersey to create similar images. I mean, it was extraordinarily irresponsible and just a crap argument, really. Then we had a lucky break because the address on the Clothoff website changed. And there was a new company name and a new address. And it led us to the owner of this particular business listed on the Clothoff website, a guy called Sergey Cheremush. And unlike everyone else we had dealt with up to that point, Sergey was a real person. He had an online identity. He was lived in California. He went to Burning Man. He styled himself as a bit of a tech entrepreneur. We got in touch with Sergey. And I think at first he thought this was an opportunity to kind of promote his businesses in The Guardian. But he realized pretty quickly that we believed he was the owner of this potentially illegal website. And he got with the program pretty quickly. And he realized that it was in his interests to help us figure out, if it wasn't him, who really was in charge of Clothoff. It turns out that he had been doing digital marketing for them, and he had only ever corresponded with them through Telegram, using anonymous names, using the kind of username you have on Telegram. Which is a pretty dodgy way to run a business, but I guess that's Sergey's problem, not ours. But he sent us the screenshots that he had of his conversations with the people from Clothoff. And that led us to a bunch of usernames. One person called Al, as in A-L, another person called Dasha. And we saw from the screenshots that Al and Dasha had been doing lots of business for Clothoff, organizing marketing, talking about opening bank accounts. These were the people we were looking for. And we went on Al's Telegram, and he had posted stories, and it suggested Clothoff was a really good business because he was traveling across Asia. He was attending football matches in Spain, you know, like pitch side seats. And Dasha was listed only as Dasha B. And we ran in fact, I think I Googled the Telegram username. And in one of the cache search results, it turns out that when we looked at her Telegram, it was Dasha B. But at some point in the recent past, her full name had been on this Telegram. And her full name was Dasha Babicheva. So we followed that name to an Instagram account. And we found on that Instagram account that she had posted a picture, the same profile picture as her Telegram. So this Dasha Babicheva, who lived in Minsk, Belarus, we had someone. She worked for Clothoff. As we were going through her Instagram, my colleague found that she was tagged a lot with somebody called Alexander, her brother, you know, someone whose name might be Al. And when we searched her brother's name, Alexander Babichow, it turns out he had registered a website called AI Imagecraft. And of course, AI Imagecraft was the website that we had found months before that had we had established been created by the same people who had made Clothoff. And so we had two names, we had two faces, we had two people, and we called Alex Babichow and confronted him and said, "You work on Clothoff, don't you?" He claimed he didn't. He claimed it was a wrong number, but I don't know about you guys, I get wrong numbers from time to time. I have never stayed on the phone with a wrong number for 8 minutes, which is what he did. And he was it was this very tense conversation. We made a podcast about it. You should listen to the podcast because we play most of the conversation. But it was this, though he was denying everything, it was this incredibly tense and fraught conversation. And I think by the end, even though he was still denying, it was very clear we were talking to somebody who was involved with this website. And then after we hung up the phone, we got an email from Clothoff giving the game up basically, saying, "We understand you've been talking to one of our members of staff. We're asking you to please not do that, respect their privacy," hilariously. "Please contact us through our media account only." But for us, that was basically what we were looking for. We had two people, we were able to name them in The Guardian. It's worth saying too that Alexander Babichow works for this Russian website called GG which helps gamers get around sanctions. If you want to play, I don't know, computer games, Counter-Strike or something, in Russia, you can go through this website, GG. Who else works for GG? Alexander German, the guy who had uploaded the Clothoff code to his GitHub. So we sensed that we were kind of nearing, you know, this network. We had a pretty good sense of who they were. We had a podcast deadline, so we put out what we knew. But we're hoping to do more. But I hope that just gives you a sense of, this was just our encounter with this one site, how well hidden they are, how difficult it is to find any information out, but also that if you keep at them, you can find out who they are, which we think is an effective way of making clear that AI is not just this kind of disembodied force that is inevitable, it's people. It's people running businesses, making money, and we think naming them and shaming them basically is a pretty good way to at least try to fight this big wave of these kinds of images that I think are probably headed our way. Thanks.
Yeah, it's a highly profitable business as well, hey?
Yeah.
And this is why they hide their tracks so well, and why often you find shell companies as well controlling the various networked companies within the larger space. Kalina, you've been following a number of these different online sites and profiles, including one site that was posing as an art generation site that also had evidence of AI-generated child sexual abuse material, which must have been horrendous to encounter. How do we take action against this rising trend in this kind of content? Is there legislation to protect women and children and anyone else that this technology is used against? And what impact does it have on the reporter reporting on these kinds of issues?
Thanks for that, Charlie. Hi, everyone. I think about this problem a lot, probably more than I should. And my colleagues here, Michael and Sam, have already kind of alluded to when you start putting pressure on identifying someone, making them feel accountable, we hear some of the same stories. So it's interesting to hear my colleagues talk about it because we hear the same thing over and over again. The same story of, I remember in one of our recent correspondence I had with ClothOff, same site that Michael's looking at, they said any attempts to ban this progress is futile. And so if someone comes out a really evil sounding phrase like resistance is futile, you cannot stop this, at the slightest sort of bits of pressure, we know that we're already kind of heading in this right direction. There is, I think the role that we play in this is accountability. It's about identifying who is behind it, who is making the money. And I think that is one of the most powerful tools we have as journalists, because really it is a multi-pronged problem. It's not just one thing. It's not just, like people ask me, how do we stop it? How do we stop these sites from shutting down? I'm like, it's more than just identifying. I think identifying is a huge component of it because we put a name to it, we put the shame on them. I think we need to have better legislation. I think we are getting to a point where individual countries are getting better and more robust laws around deepfakes, particularly non-consensual intimate deepfakes, and not just around children, but also for adults. But there's also, as far as I know, no law that actually makes the companies themselves illegal. It's only illegal to have the content, distribute the content, but it is legal currently everywhere in the world to have these sites. And that is like a gigantic gap in our legislation. And I think as soon as we get that, other things start to fall in line, because we think about web hosting platforms. Web hosting platforms have very little incentive to shut down these sites, particularly if they're not actively hosting the content. And so if we make it illegal to have these sites, then sites like businesses like Cloudflare can be like, all right, now we'll shut it down because there is laws against it. We think about legislation in this gap. I think we need to think about it as a global issue as well. You know, the US, for example, where I live, is oftentimes one of the biggest markets for this type of content. When you go and look at sites metrics, where is web traffic coming from, the US consistently is at the top of the list for many different types of sites. So even if you ban a certain site or a certain type of company in the US, they can still operate in other countries because, you know, you can have a site, you know, here in Italy, but then people from the US can still use it. We don't have great borders when it comes to the internet or digital content. So which is why I really try to advocate that everywhere, globally, there needs to be a effort to have stronger laws, stronger legislation, stronger regulations around this type of content. And I know that sounds oftentimes really scary to people who are very pro AI technology. And I am not so naive to think that we cannot, that we can go back to a time when this didn't exist. What I advocate for is adding friction to this process as we make it more and more difficult for users to use this platform, more and more difficult for this to be a sustainable and profitable model. These sites will eventually die. And I think we've seen that in time and time again. So in several of the websites we've reported on, and I'm able to like sometimes lurk because these places will set up a like Discord or some sort of online community so users can talk to each other, share tips on how to create deepfake pornography of other people, or like when people show an image like, oh, here's an image of a girl in my class, I want to make an image of her, what are additional tips, how can I get this? So there's all these like digital and online community spaces on there. And so when we've shut down access to a site or shut down, contact the payment processors, and they're no longer able to take like mainstream credit cards like Visa or MasterCard or use PayPal. We see that this makes it harder for these sites to function. If we push these sites to the fringes where they can only use crypto, that already cuts off a large swath of the population who are their users. I think addressing the wallet of this is such a key integral component of this. If it is difficult for them to continue to make money, and we've found documents sort of highlighting about the number of sales on these sites, and we can easily estimate that millions and millions of dollars are made on these sites. Like, there's no perfect number, but if we estimate from the amount of web traffic particular sites get through their sales metrics that have been leaked, it is staggering the amount and demand for this. And I think that's why these people want to stay hidden, and they want to continue trying doing business. And I joke sometimes with some of my other colleagues that the people who are in this are not in it for the love of the game. They're not in it because they love deepfake pornography and that is their passion. They're in this because they want to make money. And as Michael highlighted, living a very luxurious lifestyle is oftentimes part of this. So as soon as we continue to put this pressure on, sites shut down. And we've seen sites shut down because they were no longer able to accept payments. And I think that is such a huge component of this work. So this is a very sort of long-winded answer, kind of like going on like, what can we do? We can do a lot. There is so little that we are currently doing to address this issue, and I think we're at a point where it is going to be a global disaster when it comes to our young women. And I think one thing that often sometimes gets missed out of this conversation is I've talked to some people at the Internet Watch Foundation, and they've oftentimes studied and researched CSAM, which is child sexual abuse material. And historically speaking, we often think of that as content that is adults making it of children. And that certainly still is the case. But in recent years, we have in this newer phenomenon of young children making it of other young children. So in the Spanish case, the case in New Jersey, and in other high schools across the US and the world, in Canada, in the UK, you name it, it is a case and time again of high school boys typically, or even middle school boys making it of their classmates. And so we cannot ignore the misogynistic backgrounds of this, of that why do we think, or why are the young men of the world thinking that this is an okay thing to do? They are the ones who are, in addition to, of course, adults who are doing this, it is young boys who are making it of their classmates. And so we need to think about like what is the global conversation we need to have culturally about the way we view privacy, consensual intimate imagery, and that it ultimately is not okay. And I don't think that's a prudish thing to say. I do genuinely think that people should not be able to make non-consensual intimate images of the other person. And I think when we think about legislation is, thank goodness, more and more countries are finally kind of coming to this point where this content is marked as illegal, essentially that you are not allowed to make and distribute and share this type of content. But the failings of some of those legislations is that still all the work is put onto the victim to oftentimes identify and prove without a doubt that this person is making the content and distributing it. And even when you have all the evidence, all the proof, that oftentimes does not actually solve the issue of the content being out there, or actually in many cases, any sort of repercussions happening. Because there's a pretty interesting case in Canada where the victims knew who were the boys. This is a high school, another high school, where the victims knew who the boys were, had the proof, evidence. The boys admitted they were the ones who did it, and the police basically said there was nothing we can do. And I think you can have all the perfect conditions that happen, and still the only people who are punished in this are women and young girls. And I think that is why we need to continue doing this. I'm probably, again, rambling on my time on here, but if you can take one bit of thing today, I think everyone has the power to make a difference in this. It's not just, us sitting up here. I think calling everyone from your legislators, from pressuring financial institutions, from donating to nonprofits that help victims of AI deepfake pornography. There are so many ways we can encourage and try to nip this in the bud before it gets worse.
Yeah, and it's really important to report on, of course, and raise awareness of these issues, but you also run a risk as a reporter, right? Reporting on these issues. I mean, luckily, to our knowledge, nobody on this panel has been targeted in retribution for their reporting. But for example, Kalina at the end, there was one deepfake site that we have reported on who used her surname as a discount code for people to use to generate more non-consensual imagery, which isn't very nice and is something that you have to be really aware of when reporting on this. We've also previously worked with a German reporter who had been reporting on such issues and then found out that an album had been made of her image. And then she made it her mission to track them down. And you can read that on the Bellingcat website right now. I want to go to questions from the audience now, just so that we have enough time, and we can always come back to the stage. I see 3 hands at the moment. Perhaps we could go with the person in the yellow cardigan, yellow kind of cardigan at the front there first. I don't know where the mics are. I think they're coming. There's mics coming. They're running down the corridor. It's a beautiful venue, but it takes a while to get around. I would say shout, but I'm hard of hearing, so we'll see.
I also will add that recently, Clothoff added some of, they had
yes.
they recently updated their website, and they've included like sort of little news media ticker at the front of their page of like where their coverage has been, who's covered them, and they've added Bellingcat's name, they've added the Guardian's name on there, and so it's kind of an, I think they're very well aware.
Improving our readership.
Yeah.
Sorry, go ahead.
Sure, fabulous work, everyone, big fan. So in the United States, and perhaps not a lot of you know this, but there is a lot of debate regarding something called the Take It Down Act, which is like contentious because what it purports to do is to, well, you can explain it better, of course, because you're the experts, but it's to address this. But one of the interesting things about it is, so I'm not a journalist, I'm journalist adjacent. I work for Freedom of the Press Foundation, where we train journalists on a whole host of things, including countering online harassment. The content of this bill, as much as I dislike it, the content of this bill is actually like the, or on paper, the counter to the type of support that we give to journalists when they are under this attack, such as like, it sucks, there's no legislation, but we ask you to like, you know, you get it removed from search engines using the tools that are available to them, even though that doesn't address the actual source of where that content is distributed. Being clever about like, you know, going after the web host with like, you know, filing with abuse.ch or something, or using like clever copyright tricks in order to get content taken down. On paper, this bill actually does address it. I'm very curious to hear what you think about it, if that's like actually like a shitty win for the Republicans, or is it toothless as we suspect it might be?
I guess I'll take it. So like there's the Take It Down Act, there's Defiance Act or Defiance Bill, and it's oftentimes a complicated thing because there's even there's a variety of legislation both in the U.S. and in the U.K. There's another bill that it's actually the very first one I think that's being proposed to put restrictions on the technology itself, but I'll talk about that one in a second. So I think the hard part with a bill like the Take It Down Act or even with like the Defiance Act is that, you know, the Defiance Act makes it so that you can, as a woman, can be able to like sue the person who's responsible, or a Take It Down Act. I don't think it's enough. I think it's a little bit of something as far as of giving the power to women or trying to remove the content, and it's better than nothing. But I do not think it's enough. I do think there are really fair criticisms about it. I think in it's not the perfect example, but you know, in a sense that like, oh, if you are trying to go work out and you're trying to get fit and you're like, oh, you know, if you're not running a whole mile or whole kilometer, then it's not worth it. And some argument is like, no, even if you run just a little bit, it's still worth it, even if it's not doing the full intended benefit. And that's the way that I view these bills. I don't want these bills to be the end-all, be-all situation as far as like, this is the solution and now we can like leave it be. That's why I'm like, I do support the bills because it is still something, but it is not enough. And there's always a risk that bills are going to be abused and used in an inappropriate way. So in the UK case, one of the components of the bill is actually to make the technology. So distributing the technology, profiting, having a business that makes deepfake pornography to be illegal in the UK if it passes. But written to that bill makes it so that like the government's able to go and search your phone and devices for looking for that technology. And you can easily see how that technology or that kind of bill can be abused if someone says, oh, I suspect this person with no real grounds, and then they get to search their electronic devices at a border. And so there is this is the difficulty with legislation, because we want it to be a solution because it gives power to be able to actually create some consequences, but it oftentimes has lacking or has gaps or other components of the bill that aren't perfect or in there. And I think it's like the unfortunate sort of name of the game when it comes to legislation, if that answers your question.
Yeah, I can add to that a little bit.
We've only got 10 minutes left, so maybe.
Oh, okay, sorry. I'm just going to say, I think a bigger, like the general like overview problem with legislation is that a lot of the times they'll be used to target legal porn. Mm-hmm. So legal pornography websites where sex workers are making legal content with their own consent will get targeted by legislation that we've seen this happen with FOSTA SESTA. So that's my concern with something like Take It Down or a lot of the other bills that are happening right now. But
yeah, and you also have like the Revenge Porn Act in the UK that came in a couple of years ago as well, which again was for people who had been dating basically and using it against former daters. Sorry, we had a question on the right here. If you could just raise your hand again, sorry.
Yeah, I have a question for Colina. You said something about, or that there was child pornography in the databases for the AI image generators. I was just curious if you could talk a bit about how you figured that out and how that sort of worked.
Oh yeah, okay. So the specific case with the child imagery, it wasn't even a database, it was like being hosted on the website. So there are AI image generation models that were built off of child pornography, like I think unintentionally, just because of a lot of reason. I forget which model it was, but there's been a variety of, I think one of them, was it Midjourney? No. I have to remember, I have to look up which one it was. But there's been a number of like image generators that have been built using the database on child sexual content. In one of the websites I reported on, which I actually found being advertised on Twitter, and I was like, seems a little weird. So I went to go check out the site, and what some of the smaller websites that aren't as like sophisticated as like a Cloth Off or Undress App or any of the really big names, is that they oftentimes host a gallery of sort of display images, like what is capable for this website, and then you can go and look at the prompts and say, you know, oh, how did this person create this image? I'm going to learn. And it's oftentimes this like weirdly collaborative nature to making like deepfake pornography because other people want to learn from each other. And so I found this website that right on the front page, without having a login or anything like that, with just like image after image of child sexual abuse material. And I think that was like, so we didn't even have to hide, it wasn't even hidden in any way, shape, or capacity, and was actually even being used in like the advertising, very like scandally clad images of toddlers and infants and preteens on Twitter, which is how I found the site. And so, and in that specific case, it was found a couple of entrepreneurs who are based in Vietnam who had made this site as an AI art generation website, essentially, but they were trying to make more money, and so they added the AI pornography component to it, and kind of just, you know, they never responded to us, but, you know, I don't know if it was like intentional or a thing of just like, we're just gonna turn a blind eye because we're making money off of it, basically put no filters or restrictions on people making it of children. And it's one of those things where it's like, if people are going to make money on it, and ultimately these guys, because we could see that they had like a whole host of other businesses, from like air conditioning services to VPNs to it was just like a wide, they were just trying to make money and become wealthy. And that's what it's like, that is like the emblematic thing of a lot of these sites. So unfortunately, so for that site, just directly hosted on there. Clear, but there's been like a lot of wonderful work done out of like Stanford Internet Observatory, SIO, to identify the child sexual abuse material that's actually been in databases that are built for open source AI image generation algorithms.
And we were speaking about this last night, about the risk now of putting pictures of your children up and how it's so easy to create this kind of imagery. There was a question at the back there. I think we have time for one more, so let's squeeze that in. We have 5 minutes, guys, by the way, in terms of responses.
Okay. Hi, I'll stand up. Hi, my name is Paulina Bachlakova. I'm a freelance reporter. With my team and I here, we've been reporting on non-consensual intimate imagery, but more from like OnlyFans leaks, actually, so
Amazing.
a bit different. But yeah, I have a question for, I guess, all of you. How do you measure impact for yourself from your investigations? Because at least for us, like what we're working on, it's like, okay, so if we identify some of these sketchy companies, like that's cool, but there's going to be more. We obviously need social media platforms to take more of an active role. They're not really doing that for now. So it's like we have to kind of think of kind of different impact metrics, I guess. And yeah, I was just curious how that looks like in your work. Thank you.
Lovely final question. Sam, do you want to go first?
Sure. Yeah, it's a tough problem. Obviously, you don't want to report on something and then people go, oh, well, now I just have a new place to find my preferred leaks. So it's a balance between naming and shaming, like we just talked about, but also not boosting whatever it is that we're trying to get more awareness of, not trying to like draw people to that site, but at the same time hoping that some action is taken. I mean, we definitely measure impact in when a platform takes action, which does happen. We've seen, so OnlyFans, for example, has kind of created more safety features and security features like watermarking and things like that, so that it's harder to leak something without having a way to track it down with DCMA or copyright. So there's those tools that happen as a result of that reporting for creators who might have leaks of them out there. I think a lot of the times these platforms don't want to do anything until they're blown up about it. So it's, I don't think it's ever a bad thing to report on it because you just never know what kind of awareness comes out of that one single piece. But yeah, I mean, it's a tough balance for sure. I think also just like giving voice to people who are having this, everyone's having the same kind of problem, like OnlyFans leaks, for example. But they may not realize together that this is an issue. And I've had this happen with reporting on like real abuse imagery, where it's like a victim will come forward and then lots more will read that and say, oh, that happened to me too. And I think that's a really important part of impact too, is that lots of people are having the same problem but might not know that each other exists because there's a lot of shame around this problem. And then they can maybe come together, you know, like seek legal action that way, whatever it is that they want to do. But yeah.
Yeah, I mean, in our case, Clothoff was blocked in the UK by Clothoff. Like they just stopped letting people, you know, from UK servers or whatever go to it. So we felt like that was something. It also was cited by a minister in Australia who moved legislation to sort of make these kinds of things illegal in the country. So that felt like, all right, there's like a legislative win here, even though in practice, how much effect is it actually having? I don't know. If I was to think about it, like one thing that struck me about going to Spain was that Miriam, the woman we met there, told us that even within the town, there was a lot of doubt over whether this was a bad thing. Like, was it just like boys will be boys, or was it something more serious? And perhaps by reporting on it and, you know, keeping it, like starting that conversation, we can at least establish the norm that this is wrong, which feels like a kind of obvious thing, but like is not, I think, to a lot of people. So yeah, I would just say, I think as journalists, it's very hard to measure impact always, but I don't know, you do it and just like hope that other people who can make impact pick up what you're doing and do something.
And finally, Kalina, I guess you're going to say about the payment sites, no?
Yeah, I think for me, some of the biggest impacts are when a website gets shut down, or if we're not able to get the whole domain taken down, their payment systems are stifled to only crypto because there's nothing we can do when it comes to crypto. I think, you know, we've been able to see some really great wins, and so with the Clothoff site in particular, one of their main domains was clothoff.io, and after some reporting and an expose we did with 60 Minutes, the main site, you couldn't get to it anywhere. So that to us was like a huge win because that site was receiving like millions and millions of views and visits each month. And even though the sites are still up because they have a variety of different top-level domains, and as Michael alluded to, it's not just oftentimes one site, but a whole network of different websites together. So taking down one is oftentimes enough, but even when we take down the big ones, that is still such a huge win to me. So cutting off those the way they make money, and ideally getting the sites shut down.
And I'll just end this talk by saying that I've just tested Mr. Deepfakes again, and it's still not up, so fingers crossed that remains for the rest of time. Thank you all for your time today. Thank you for listening as well, and please do check out the wonderful work of Sam, Michael, and Kalina in 404, The Guardian, and of course, bellingcat.com, and come talk to us if you have any more questions. Thank you so much.